All right, everybody, welcome back to the pod. I'm so happy before Election Day we get to have one more conversation with our good friend David Frum. He is a staff writer at The Atlantic. He is the author of Trumpocalypse. David Frum, great to see you.
Hey, thank you for having me back.
I have to start with this Madison Square Garden rally, which I think
Yeah.
is, a lot of times these things are blips and we move on to the next outrage. But I do think there were things said there that will have legs. And the first one is this comedian who kind of opened things up,
Yeah.
making fun of many things and people, including, saying that Puerto Rico is like a
Yeah.
pile of garbage in the middle of the
Yeah.
ocean. What'd you make of that? Do you think it matters?
So in 2016, Hillary Clinton at a fundraising event said that half of Trump's voters belonged to something she called the basket of deplorables. And she specified they were racist, they were sexist, they were homophobic. So the Trump people took enormous offense at these words, so much so they actually cut an ad based on them. And if you go to my Twitter feed, I've got a link and you can see the ad. It's still on YouTube. Because how dare you, arrogant coastal liberals, speak to our heartland supporters in such an offensive way? We are people who are entitled to respect. Our feelings are paramount. We are the true Americans, and no one may criticize us ever, even if we are, many of us, racist and sexist and homophobic. So fast forward, not Trump himself, who has said many objectionable things about Puerto Rico and who was so disdainful and neglectful of Puerto Rico when it was struck by a hurricane. You'll remember he withheld billions of dollars of aid. He then flew down and tossed packages of paper toweling to people as if they were dogs. But at a rally, the comedian he selected, whose script was vetted and fed into a teleprompter, he said, this comedian said things that were offensive. And now the attitude is, well, fuck them if they can't take a joke. We all need to be thick-skinned here. This isn't like insulting people from Ohio. That's completely different. Now, you call them deplorable. Obviously, that's a federal case. These are dusky islanders. They deserve no respect. And they should have a sense of humor. They should turn the other cheek. After all, isn't that why God put them on this earth? For us to insult them, but for them never to insult us. That's what's going on here. So, yeah, I think in general, it would be good if we all took less offense. And in my own life, I try to concentrate much more on not giving offense than not taking offense. But you don't get to be the kind of candidate that Donald Trump is. Behave in such a way, work the refs in the way that he has, and then when your chosen comedian gives intentional offense to people that he was too ignorant to realize might be voters if they moved to the mainland, and which they were legally entitled to do because they're U.S. citizens, even if Puerto Rico's not a state. Because he was thick, and you pay the price, now everyone has to say, fuck them if they can't take a joke.
Yeah, and there's, this is the closing argument 10 days before the election, Madison Square Garden. He's saying this on stage behind the Trump, Vance logo at the podium. As you noted, the speech was vetted. The C word, which was going to be, Kamala Harris was going to be called that, was taken out by Trump's handlers. So they left this in. And look, I'm told that there's over like 200,000 Puerto Rican American voters living in Pennsylvania. Wouldn't it be something? Donald Trump has run the whole campaign, maybe his whole life, but certainly Donald Trump runs his whole campaign as if he's trying to lose, and yet it never really catches up to him. But I wonder, wouldn't it be funny, or maybe it's karma or something, if Donald Trump loses the election because of this stupid comedian's stupid joke?
People don't lose the election because of stupid things. In fact, contrary to what JD Vance says, most of us are good at figuring out what is just a mistake or a stray word or a passing insult. It wouldn't be, the joke wouldn't be powerful, but for the backdrop of Trump's maltreatment of the hurricane in 2017 and the stark contrast between the attitude that Trump brings when natural disasters strike his people to the way he behaves when natural disasters strike other people. So I think the reason this joke works is it activated a memory that is now 7 years old, and so maybe not at the front of mind of many, certainly not of those who were not immediately affected, but his relatives were. Yeah, he really disrespects us. He really does. And that's not an accidental or incidental feature of his message. It is core. And when natural disasters struck Puerto Rico, Trump made it clear, you don't toss paper towels at people you regard as your human equals. Politicians don't do that. If you have something to, first they should have proper help from impersonal authorities. But if the president's going to be there, there's a different when presidents go to military bases on Thanksgiving and serve food, which is a presidential tradition. The president acts as a servitor, that he puts the food on the plate and he presents the tray. That is, he enacts a ritual of relationship, of equality.
It's servant leadership.
The core thing that Trump has never grasped, and this is a phrase I've been using in some recent presentations, if you walk into the poorest city in America and go to the meanest street and find the most deprived person there, and you're the president of the United States, and you meet that person is your boss. That you work for him. He does not. And Trump has always believed that he is not the top public servant of the United States. He believes he's the ruler. That's why he is so much more comfortable with the Putins and the Xis and the Kim Jong-uns, because he wants to be a ruler, not to be a representative.
Or he's daddy who spanks the naughty girl, as Tucker put it the other week.
That was weird. That was
that was weird. That had like an erotic angle to it. It had a paternalistic, dictatorial angle. It was a lot of stuff going on.
Well, as some listeners may know, and as you know, at least recently I have 3 children, 2 daughters, and one of them was tragically lost in February. So my nerves are a little jangly on the subject of how people talk about their children, and especially their daughters. But so I may be a little not the right person to ask this. I may be, as I said, my nerves are kind of jangly on the subject. But that was depraved. That was depraved. That was both brutal and that was incestuous. That was sadistic. It was. What was that?
And he even said, like, I'm not going to say that this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. This is going to hurt you a lot more. He went into this.
This is some elaborately worked out fantasy in his mind. And, I believe that parents should not lay hands on children ever. But I understand there's something different when the child is below the age of puberty. But for a father to have this elaborately worked out idea about laying hands on his adolescent daughter, whom he describes as horrible, I assume this does not actually carry over into the behaviors in his real life, but it is a window into a man's mind that, as I say, I'm a little jangled on the subject, but man, no.
Yeah, it
really
seemed to be like telling, like a tell or
really
something.
No.
But you mentioned JD Vance. You were alluding to this. So JD Vance has this shtick now where he's like, look, I didn't see the stupid joke. Maybe it was racist. Maybe it was. Who's to say? But look, I think we are so, thin skinned now. And I'm like, he's doing this thing that Jon Stewart used to do. Remember, he would go political and attack people.
Yeah.
And then if you pushed back, he would say, who am I? Like, I'm just a comedian. I come on before puppets on Comedy Central.
Right.
And JD Vance is doing this thing now. Like, when it serves his purposes, everything's serious, everything's deadly serious and matters greatly, and the moral universe is hinging on something. But as soon as it doesn't serve his purposes, it's all just lulls,
Well, it's also this way of talking that JD Vance has is a demonstration of just what a empty and imitative person he is. He said something the other day that really struck me. He said, at least Hunter Biden would be a fun person to have. This is the quotation. My reconstruction of the quotation. It's not verbatim, but you'll get the gist. At least Hunter Biden would be fun to hang out with. You got a sense that he's a fun person, whereas Kamala Harris is a schoolmarm. And I listened to that. I thought, that's not you, JD Vance. Because actually, JD Vance is a very sober, serious-minded person. He would not want to hang out with a cocaine-addicted fan of strip shows. That's not him. And indeed, he loves school, and school saved his life. And his wife is a highly educated person, and schoolmarm is his type. And I don't say that critically. So it would be my type too. So what's going on here? And that's something Tucker Carlson said to him. Because Tucker Carlson is always making jokes like that about how, Tucker Carlson Tucker Carlson is now, as I understand it, drug-free. But in his earlier life,
you and I know Tucker, both know Tucker pretty well. You worked with him at the Weekly Standard. I worked with him at the Daily Caller.
And I know the kind of person he is. I know the kinds of things he says. And so that remark, and he, in fact, and Hunter Biden were indeed close friends, and he solicited a letter of reference from Hunter Biden for one of his children when the child applied to Georgetown University. And I think got it. That's something Tucker Carlson would say, and that would fit the either his real character or certainly the character he wants to portray. It's weird, and I don't want to use weird, that's the JD Vance word, but it is out of character for JD Vance to talk in that way. So I realize he's just like this sponge where he plays roles. And this is a Tucker Carlson bit that he is doing the way certain kinds of British school children do Monty Python bits. He's doing a Tucker bit. And it just is a sign of just like what this person who, if Trump wins, will exercise enormous power in a Trump White House, because if you have a White House where the president doesn't get to work till noon and the vice president gets to work at 6 or 6:30 or 7 in the morning, in the hours before the president shows up, the vice president can get a lot done. This is going to be a very powerful person. And who is he really? And who is he pretending to be?
Scary, right? And then you've got Elon Musk. Yeah.
Okay, so can we refer to other podcasters? Do you know the podcaster, or the radio broadcaster Hugh Hewitt?
Oh, yeah. No, I know Hugh. I've known Hugh for a long time.
Okay, I haven't listened to his show in his long time, but in the olden days, he used to begin every interview by asking the guest the question, do you believe that Alger Hiss was guilty or innocent? Alger Hiss being, of course...
It would also be The Looming Tower. Have you read The Looming Tower? Yeah. And I want to focus. Or something.
I want to focus on this point. So he'd asked, do you believe that Alger Hiss is guilty? Now, some of your younger listeners may not know who Alger Hiss was, but he was a State Department official who became quite important in the 1940s. And it was revealed that back in the 1930s, he had been part of a communist circle and had done some espionage work. Not very important espionage work. No, he was not the Rosenbergs. He worked in the Department of Agriculture. He didn't have access to much, but what he had access to, he betrayed. And this became a big deal and very controversial culture war case. And for a long time, some liberal-minded people would deny the guilt of Alger Hiss, which has now been established beyond doubt. So this was the question. It was a test. And it was absurd because, in 1998 or 2008, I mean, no one, no matter how liberal, doubts that Alger Hiss was guilty. But it was like a tell to say, this is payback for back in the 1940s and 50s and even 60s when people like you doubted it. Okay, so we now have these sinister Russian contacts. The demonstrated proof that the wealthiest man in the world, certainly the wealthiest man in the United States, the most important funder of the Trump campaign, the person running the get out the vote operation for the Trump campaign, the person who is one of the largest military contractors in the United States, who is doing satellite launches for the United States, who is providing Starlink services for the Ukrainian forces in the field. This man has an undisclosed, highly intimate relationship with the highest ranks of the Russian leadership, and that is clearly reflected in his own public sayings. When Elon Musk bought Twitter, he presented an Elon Musk peace plan for the Ukraine that was dictated, we now can see, was dictated to him by Putin to present as his own work. And this is all fine. I mean, Alger Hiss, when he was working at the Department of Agriculture and got information about agriculture planning that was intolerable. That was intolerable treason, and anybody who doubts that is not a fit interlocutor. But we have this deep Russian penetration of the heart of the Republican Party. Never mind the sinister and mysterious relationships between the past president and hoped for president to be. So I'm sure I will never be on the Hugh Hewitt show again. But if I were on, I would say yes, Alger Hiss was guilty, and you are supporting him for president of the United States.
Well, I want to stay on Tucker and JD a little longer because they both have other stuff going on. So at that same Madison Square Garden rally, Tucker, he went on this sort of riff about like how bad Kamala Harris is.
Yeah.
And that there's no way she would ever get 85 million votes. And if she did, that would be evidence. Yeah. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here. I could put the quote in, but by now we're several days behind. People have heard this, I'm sure. But I think it raises speculation that what he's trying to do is lay the groundwork for another election denial. Do you see that happening?
There are a lot of straws in the wind, and it's not just Carlson. It's from Trump himself, and this may be a very touchy situation. Now, the difference between now and 2020 is that Trump is not the incumbent president. And so there's certain methods of power that he does not have. But there's no question that he will still have the ability to jawbone state officials, as he tried to do in 2021, Brad Raffensperger and others, to try to get the state officials to do the dirty work. The optimistic message is that one of the lessons I hope that everyone has learned from the experience of 2020 is however reluctant the courts are to hold to account Donald Trump, they will not be reluctant to hold to account everybody else in the vote denial operation.
Yeah.
And
there's a woman serving 9 years now for being a part of the fake electors scandal.
Right. So you don't want to be that. You may not want to resist Trump or get in his way, but you don't want to do his dirty work because he's maybe immune, but you will not be. So that is a sign of optimism. I think also many of the people who came to attack Congress on January 6th believed that they were doing something proper because they were obeying the incumbent president. Similar disturbances in 2025 will be done by not the president, against the government. And it will look much more like open rebellion against legal authority. So I am hopeful, but I do think that's the plan. And I think one of your next questions is there's also a plan for the House of Representatives, which is troubling.
So this is Donald Trump talking, sort of motioning toward Mike Johnson, that the Speaker of the House, said something about having a, quote, little secret.
Yeah. Well, yes. And what the reference
which raises speculation, like,
if the House that convenes on January 3rd, 2025 has a Republican majority, and if enough chaos can be generated in the Electoral College, then the House is the court of last resort, and they vote by states where Republicans have a majority of the state delegations. And this may explain why the Madison Square rally happened in New York, because although Trump is not going to win New York presidentially, New York is a place where it may be determined whether Republicans win a majority in the House of Representatives. Republicans although they had a bad year generally in 2022, they had a good year in New York State. And if they can hold some of those seats in Long Island and upstate New York, they can hold all of them, even add one. They will keep their majority in the House of Representatives, and so they can do Trump's dirty work. Now, what I take some comfort in is the fact that Mike Johnson did ultimately do the right thing on Ukraine after a lot of hesitation, but he did do the right thing. I am not sure that Trump's confidence in Mike Johnson to do the dirty work is properly placed. And I think one of the reasons that Trump said those words in public was he's trying to put pressure on a Johnson who has been evasive. And my guess is that Trump has talked to him about these things, and Johnson has said, hemina, 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 we'll have to see, Mr. President, sir, and of course I'm voting for you, sir. But the actual contingencies, I can't predict, I can't say, it'll depend on the facts. Trump has not gotten the commitment from Johnson that he wants, and that's why he tried to pin him down in public at Madison Square Garden.
I could see him doing
reading.
I think he did similar things to Pence. Like, he's going to do the right thing. We know it, Mike. You're going to, he would. Yeah. And so it's almost like if you're going to get blamed for doing it, you might as well get the benefit of doing it. So
but it's
also
like
a psychological game.
Or mobilizing public pressure on someone who's been recalled. I mean, because if Pence had been enthusiastic, then it would be better to surprise people, not to do the advance thing.
Right.
If Johnson were on board with this, don't tip your hand in advance. So why do it? Because he's trying to generate pressure on Johnson because he's sensing he's meeting resistance. And I just take enormous comfort from, and maybe false comfort, but I take comfort from Johnson eventually coming through on Ukraine. That reassure, if you just, I mean, we can't talk about team normal anymore, but if you talk about people who, when the chips are down, will be loyal to American institutions and people who will be disloyal to American institutions, Pence showed he was ultimately loyal to them. And I think Johnson is giving indications that he is an ultimate loyalist to institutions, whatever his other policy views are, that he cannot be counted upon so far to do Trump's bidding and overturn a lawful election.
Fair, but I don't want to bet democracy on Mike Johnson being strong enough to stand up to the pressure. But I do.
And of course, Trump might win legitimately. That's not impossible.
JD Vance did something else that I'm seeing more and more, which is to say, after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life in Pennsylvania, Trump Trump and his team really didn't wave the bloody shirt that much. And I think it's because they thought they were going to win already in a landslide anyway. However, it seems like, JD Vance was saying things, like they tried to kill him. And any negative thing you say about him could be endangering Trump's life. I'm starting to
Yeah.
hear themes like that.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is super dangerous and scary for obvious reasons.
JD Vance has said negative things about me. Did he threaten my life? I mean, again, this is the deplorables versus Puerto Ricans. That they're not on the level. I mean, obviously. So the rule that I wrote a piece for the Atlantic some years ago about the cult of victimhood, and just the sheer disparity between, like, one of the things, if you're trying hard to be a good person, what you want to say is, I want to be as charitable to others as I can and as strict with myself as I can. And when I do my moral self-examination, I always want to, like, really test myself. Did I do that for the right reason or not? And when I look at others, I want to make sure, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But there is this ideological tendency to do just the opposite. And maybe it's human, but I think this is extreme, where that Vance and Carlson and Trump are free to say whatever they want. Carlson has denounced me on TV, and I did get death threats after it. I didn't take them. They weren't, I think, very serious in the end. But every time you do a show on me,
Hey, David, if you can't take a joke, man, I think we're too thin-skinned. I'm just joking. No, it's horrible.
I do take it, and it goes with the territory. In most ways, I have an easy and agreeable job. There is this downside risk every once in a while that somebody may take offense at something I say and try to incite someone to take action against me. So that's one of the risks. But on balance, better job than most, so I can't complain. But so it is true of being a past president of the United States. It is also a better job than most, and people will criticize you. And of course, we have an elaborate array of security measures in place. But the president also has some obligation to cooperate with those security measures. And one of the reasons that Donald Trump was so exposed in Butler, Pennsylvania, was because of his long record of going deadbeat on the venues he hired. He often finds it difficult to get indoor venues because they know he won't pay the bill. So he's outdoors in Butler when he should be indoors, exposing his own people to heat stroke and dehydration, about which he's indifferent. And that's one of the reasons he put himself at risk.
Well, speaking of rallies, Kamala is doing something at the Ellipse. And if nothing else, I'm guessing it's going to make traffic rather interesting in D.C.
Yeah,
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, look, we're in D.C. We're all sort of used to that. I remember our house is reasonably close to the vice president's mansion here in D.C., and we would sometimes be driving the kids to school or to an outing, and we'd be stuck in traffic. And at age 8, a Washington kid can tell the difference between a presidential and a vice presidential motorcade. They just look different. And yeah, there's the vice president going. So yeah, traffic will be messed up, but that's why That's why the founding fathers were so right before the invention of the automobile not to put the capital in New York or Philadelphia. Just think of what traffic would be like there. You have a designated city that is all for traffic jams.
So Stephen Miller at this MSG rally, as they call it, said America is for Americans and Americans only, something like that. And I see, I've not vetted this, but some people are saying that this comes from Hitler. I'm not sure, but regardless of where it's derived from, it's interesting, right? Because apparently Steve Miller's great grandparents were, Jewish immigrants, who came to America, I guess, probably fleeing oppression in Eastern Europe. And if Americans at that time had this attitude, well, America is for Americans only, he probably wouldn't be here, maybe even exist.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I endlessly marvel at in Trump world is the ability to take ideas that really aren't objectionable and to make them sound objectionable. Like, I think for like JD Vance's childless cat ladies comment. So he could have said something like the following. We've got a lot of social science indicators that Americans are having fewer children than they themselves say they want. When you ask Americans, how many children do you want? What's your ideal family? They give a certain number. When you ask women, it's slightly higher than it is for men. And yet, when you look at the children Americans are having, it falls short. So something is happening in American life where people aren't able to have the children they want. And we don't know exactly what it is, but it would be important to find out. And to the extent that public policy can correct it, here are some ideas for making it possible for people to have the children they want. Because after all, children are a source of joy and fulfillment in life. And when you look back on it at the end of a life, whatever career success you've had, and I know, I mean, I was a U.S. Senator, whatever career success, nothing matters more to me than my family. I know you feel the same. Like, it's like completely obvious and banal, and no one would object. How do you take that thought and make it a slap in the face? What kind of jerk do you have to be? In the same way that obviously in every democracy, that the government is accountable to the citizens of that country. If you're running for prime minister of Denmark, you say, obviously we have care and concern for the world and for our European partners, but our tax our tax euros. These are unexceptional thoughts. So how do you make them ugly? And I think it is a remarkable testimony to the ugliness that looms inside these people, that the most commonplace idea, which you could write in 100 ways, that even the people who are going to vote against you could say, well, we have to skip over that line. There's nothing there for us. They make it nasty. And I think
because
they make it nasty.
What Stephen Miller means. He doesn't mean that America, the American government is by the people, for the people, and that should be responsive to these citizens. He means if you're not
that
white Christian, then do not, no vacancy.
He means that Melania Trump and Elon Musk, both of whom arrived in the United States illegally and changed their status, are proper Americans. But the Puerto Ricans, who became part of the United States in the 1890s, and every one of whom is an American citizen and has been for, I think, since the 1910s, they're not proper Americans. And that's what's going on there. So when he says America for the Americans, he actually doesn't mean that. He means some people are more American than others. And that was what was so arresting about JD Vance's speech at the Republican National Convention, where he made a point about how he had 7 generations of ancestors buried in Kentucky. That somehow made him more a proper American than people who had merely 6 or perhaps 5 or only 4 or a disreputable 3 or a shameful 2 or an impossible 1, and maybe they themselves would be the first. That Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose family had been important in the state of New York going back to Dutch days, always gave the reproach to this about how it's important to remember, as he said in his speech to the Daughters of the American Revolution, it's important for all of us, but especially for people like you and me, meaning those whose ancestors go back so a long way, to remember that we are all the descendants of revolutionaries and there's something about that concept of they're arguing against that concept of American citizenship, and that's why former illegals like Elon Musk and Melania Trump are okay, and Puerto Ricans get paper towels thrown at their faces.
What did you make of the Washington Post decision, I guess Jeff Bezos' decision not to endorse?
Yeah, I was not as I read this in a way very different from a lot of people. I think Jeff Bezos did a tremendously public-spirited thing by buying the Washington Post a decade ago. He built it. It was in financial trouble. He stabilized it and built into a great paper during the Trump days. And maybe he prefers Trump, maybe he doesn't, I don't know. But he was responding to pressure. And I think everyone is so obsessing over the places where you could see the indents of the pressure that they are not paying attention to. The real message of that to me was Bezos, one of the richest men in the world, feels that he would be in danger of retaliation from a Trump administration. That's the news, not what the Post did. That he feels himself in danger. And I think that I would say to anyone who is sort of a more conservative-minded person who's weighing this vote, and there are such people. So we all understand that if Harris wins, the Wall Street Journal will not be in danger of retaliation, and the owners of the Wall Street Journal will not be in danger of retaliation. And they don't think so. Nobody thinks so. Whereas everyone understands that if Trump wins, retaliation will be the order of the day. That's the difference. One will retaliate for criticism, the other won't. And maybe and even no matter how critical you intend to be of the Harris administration, it is that if you know I can be as critical as I want and nothing will happen to me, that right away tells you what side of the line you need to stand on.
So you're saying that there should be more of a Lyndon Johnson Democratic Party that goes after. I get your message, David, loud and clear. Yeah. Okay, but I'm keeping an enemies list.
I'm saying I don't blame the Post so much, and I don't blame Bezos so much. I think that people are just. I think it's one of these magic tricks where your eye has been led to the wrong direction, to the recipient of the pressure, and not where it should be, which is on the place where the pressure is coming from.
Indeed, I agree with you on that. Always a pleasure. Any final thoughts before Election Day? Anything you want to plug?
I don't have anything I want to plug. Just to say, I mean, obviously, this is a very tense and nerve-wracking time, and it shouldn't be this way, but it is. And as difficult as it is to be this way, I just say, and this is maybe a final, just be grateful to be alive at a time when your country needs you, because it needs you now.
Amen. Well, and I'm grateful that you came on, especially at this time. You could have blown us off, too busy, and I'm grateful that you came here to have this conversation. David Frum, thank you for coming back on the show.